Today we're diving deep into one of the biggest developments surrounding XRP and Ripple that we've heard in a very long time. Because during Consensus in Miami, Brad Garlinhouse finally started revealing how Ripple plans to use its newest acquisitions, G Treasury and Hidden Road, to massively expand activity on the XRP ledger. And honestly, if you've been waiting for Ripple to explain how real institutional adoption is actually going to happen, this may have been one of the clearest explanations we've gotten so far. But that's not all, because later in this video, we also need to talk about the surprising developments surrounding Michael Saylor and what's happening with Strategy, formerly known as MicroStrategy, because I think the contrast between Ripple's strategy and what we're now seeing in parts of the Bitcoin world is becoming impossible to ignore. And in many ways, it highlights why the XRP community has been so focused on utility, infrastructure, and real-world financial integration from the very beginning. Hey guys, welcome back to Whiteboard Crypto Update. In today's video, we will talk about XRP. So, be sure to stay focused as you surely don't want to miss out on this. If you are new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on post notifications by hitting the bell so you never miss any of our uploads. This video is for educational purposes only. It is not financial advice. Always do your own research before making any investment decisions. So let's start with Ripple and what Brad Garlinhouse discussed on stage, because the details here are extremely important. One of the biggest questions investors have been asking ever since Ripple started acquiring companies like Hidden Road and G Treasury is simple. How exactly is this going to benefit the XRP ledger? Is this just another headline, or is Ripple actually building a system that could bring massive payment volume onto blockchain rails? According to Brad Garlinhouse, this is not theoretical anymore. Ripple is actively working with the largest enterprise customers already connected to these businesses and helping them integrate blockchain technology into processes they are already running every single day. And that's the key point most people miss. Ripple is not trying to force companies to suddenly become crypto experts overnight. They are not asking Fortune 500 firms to throw away everything they currently use and rebuild their entire financial infrastructure from scratch. Instead, Ripple is approaching adoption in the smartest way possible. They're taking systems these corporations already rely on and quietly upgrading the settlement layer underneath them, using blockchain technology and the XRP ledger. Brad specifically talked about how many of G Treasury's clients are major Fortune 500 corporations, including companies like American Airlines, and these firms still face enormous inefficiencies when moving money globally. Even though modern treasury management software has improved dashboards, reporting, visibility, and asset management tools, the actual rails underneath the financial system remain outdated. At the end of the day, after all the fancy front-end software is finished doing its job, the money still has to move through traditional correspondent banking systems that were built decades ago. That's the real bottleneck. And according to Ripple, that's exactly the problem they're solving. Think about it this way. A company can have beautiful software interfaces, advanced treasury analytics, automated workflows, and every modern financial tool imaginable. But if payments still take 3 to 5 days to settle, if transfers still involve multiple intermediaries, if liquidity remains fragmented, and if international remittances are still expensive and slow, then the core problem hasn't actually been fixed. The user experience may look modern on the surface, but the infrastructure underneath is still operating like it's stuck in the past. What Ripple appears to be doing now is incredibly strategic. Instead of telling these institutions they must fully embrace crypto culture or become blockchain native companies, Ripple is simply saying, keep doing what you're already doing. Keep using the same systems and interfaces your teams are comfortable with, but allow us to upgrade the settlement rails in the background. In other words, Ripple wants the transition to feel almost invisible. Companies don't need to understand every technical detail behind blockchain technology. They just need to experience the benefits: faster settlement, lower costs, better liquidity management, instant global transfers, reduced friction. That's the pitch. And honestly, this approach makes far more sense than what many people in crypto were demanding for years. There was always this idea floating around that institutions should be forced to directly adopt crypto wallets, manage digital assets themselves, and completely rebuild their financial infrastructure around blockchain from day one. But most corporations were never going to do that. They wanted regulatory clarity. They wanted enterprise-grade liquidity. They wanted proven systems. And most importantly, they wanted simplicity. Ripple seems to understand that adoption doesn't happen by forcing complexity onto institutions. Adoption happens when you remove complexity entirely. What Ripple is essentially doing is abstracting away the complicated parts of crypto while allowing businesses to access the advantages underneath. And that may end up being one of the most important strategies in the entire blockchain industry. When you really zoom out, this is actually very close to what the original vision for cryptocurrency was supposed to be. Long before NFTs, meme coins, speculative hype cycles, and endless token launches dominated headlines, one of the primary goals behind blockchain technology was the ability to move value instantly across the internet. Fast settlement, efficient payments, borderless financial activity. That was the foundation. And according to Ripple's current strategy, that's exactly where they are focusing. Instead of trying to convince companies to abandon the financial systems they already know, Ripple is rebuilding the infrastructure layer underneath those systems. That's a massive difference. The customer experience largely stays the same, but the back end becomes dramatically more efficient through blockchain settlement. And according to Brad Garlinhouse, this strategy could potentially bring enormous transaction volume onto the XRP ledger over the coming years. One of the biggest moments from the discussion came when Brad estimated that G Treasury alone could bring roughly $3 trillion in payment volume onto the XRP ledger over the next 3 years. That number is absolutely massive. And whether the final number ends up being exactly that or not, the broader point is what matters. Ripple is no longer trying to build adoption from scratch. They are acquiring businesses that already have enterprise relationships, already have institutional customers, and already process huge amounts of financial activity. Then they are integrating blockchain settlement directly into those ecosystems. That changes everything. Because now, Ripple doesn't need to convince millions of companies individually to adopt crypto. Instead, they can work through platforms and infrastructure providers that corporations already trust and already use. It's a much more scalable strategy. And honestly, it mirrors how most major technology revolutions actually happen in the real world. Take the internet as an example. Most corporations didn't become internet companies themselves. Retailers like Walmart didn't suddenly transform into networking infrastructure providers. Instead, they plugged into existing internet infrastructure built by specialized technology firms. Ripple appears to be positioning itself in a very similar way for blockchain finance. They want to become the infrastructure layer powering this transition. And that's why comparisons to cloud computing actually make a lot of sense here. In many ways, Ripple wants to become the blockchain equivalent of Amazon Web Services for global finance. Institutions don't necessarily want to become blockchain experts. They simply want access to better infrastructure. Ripple builds the infrastructure and corporations utilize it without needing to manage every technical detail themselves. This is where I think the XRP story becomes much bigger than just price speculation. Because if Ripple succeeds in embedding XRP ledger rails into treasury systems, payment systems, liquidity management systems, and institutional financial operations worldwide, then the long-term network effects could become enormous. Over time, businesses will naturally gravitate toward whichever rails provide faster settlement, lower fees, higher reliability, and greater efficiency. And realistically, once companies experience instant settlement compared to waiting several business days for traditional transfers, it becomes difficult to imagine them wanting to go backward. Sure, there may be hesitation initially. Institutions are always cautious when adopting new infrastructure, but once the efficiency gains become obvious, adoption can accelerate very quickly. Now, while all of this was happening, another major story started developing involving strategy in Bitcoin. Reports emerged suggesting the company may potentially need to consider selling Bitcoin under certain circumstances, and this sparked a lot of discussion across the crypto space. And I think this situation highlights a huge philosophical difference between what Ripple is building and what many speculative crypto models have relied on over the years. A lot of projects in crypto have historically depended on narratives that sounded exciting but never fully made practical sense when you examine them closely. We've seen this happen repeatedly throughout the industry with collapses involving projects like FTX, Terraform Labs, and the Terra Luna ecosystem, and platforms like Celsius. These systems often relied on unsustainable assumptions, unrealistic yields, or models that only worked under perfect market conditions. Ripple's approach feels fundamentally different because it's centered around solving existing business problems, real payment inefficiencies, real settlement delays, real liquidity fragmentation, real enterprise infrastructure. Instead of promising impossible returns or building speculative financial loops, Ripple is trying to integrate blockchain into real-world financial activity that already exists. That's why many XRP supporters continue emphasizing utility, because long-term value in technology markets usually comes from infrastructure that businesses genuinely need and continue using over time. Network effects strengthen, liquidity deepens, adoption expands gradually, and the technology becomes harder to replace because it's embedded into critical systems. When people look back at the blockchain industry years from now, there will likely be companies that represented short-term hype cycles and others that successfully built long-term infrastructure. Some projects will resemble the speculative internet companies that disappeared during the dot-com era, while others may emerge as the foundational platforms that powered the next generation of financial technology. And based on what we're seeing right now, Ripple clearly believes the path to lasting success is enterprise integration, institutional usability, and invisible blockchain adoption happening underneath systems businesses already trust. Instead of trying to force the world into crypto overnight, they are slowly rebuilding the financial rails behind the scenes. And if this strategy works the way Ripple believes it will, the impact on the XRP ledger over the next several years could be enormous. Well, guys, that's all we have for you today. What are your thoughts on XRP? Get involved and let us know in the comments down below. If you guys like this video, then be sure to give this video a big thumbs up. Thank you for watching.